Imagine seeing strange white sails on the horizon, carrying men with guns, fire, and greed, coming to steal your family, your people, your freedom. Welcome to the Lost African Diaries, where we uncover the stories history tried to erase and voices the world tried to silence. If you could go back in time to the coasts of West Africa in the early 1400s, you would find a world alive with culture, wealth, and knowledge. The Congo Kingdom stretched along the Congo River, with cities carefully organized under the authority of wise kings and councils of elders. Merchants traded copper, ivory, and salt, while artisans sculpted intricate masks and statues in wood and bronze. In the south, the Kingdom of Benin created masterful bronze plaques and fortified cities, while the Oyo Empire in present-day Nigeria built cavalry systems and strongholds that defended their people. Farther north, Mali and Songhai empires thrived with trade across the Sahara, connecting gold, salt, and knowledge from Timbuktu to distant lands. Libraries in Timbuktu held texts on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Scholars debated complex ideas under the shade of courtyards, while marketplaces buzzed with the sound of commerce and the chatter of traders from across Africa. This was not a land waiting to be discovered. It was a land of civilizations, sophisticated, powerful, and self-sufficient, rich in culture and human life. Then the horizon changed. White sails appeared, tall and gleaming under the sun. The Portuguese had arrived, first as curious explorers seeking new trade routes under the orders of Prince Henry the Navigator. Men like Diogo Gomez and Alvise Cadamosto sailed down the Senegal and Gambia rivers in the mid-1400s, initially exchanging gifts such as beads, mirrors, and cloth. African leaders observed them with curiosity, cautious but willing to trade. Yet behind the polite gestures and diplomacy lay a darker intent. The Portuguese wanted not only gold and ivory, but human lives. They sought captives to sell to Europe, a trade that would soon expand into the devastating transatlantic slave system. In 1441, the first captives were taken from coastal villages along the Senegambia River. Mothers screamed as their children were dragged to ships. Fathers raised spears, but European firearms proved superior to local weapons. Villagers tried to resist, hiding in forests, fleeing along rivers, or negotiating with desperate courage, but many fell into the hands of the strangers. These early raids set a terrifying precedent. African people, no matter their status or power, were now at risk of being stolen from their homes. Families that had lived together for generations were torn apart, leaving grief and fear in their wake. The social fabric of villages began to unravel, and kingdoms faced the first shockwaves of European interference. By the late 1400s, the Portuguese had constructed São Jorge da Mina, later called Elmina Castle, on the Gold Coast of present-day Ghana. Its walls were formidable, designed to protect goods and hold human captives. Captives were chained in dungeons, stripped of names, languages, and identities. They were no longer seen as humans, but as cargo, objects to be bought, sold, and transported across seas. Even in this dire situation, Africans resisted. Mothers whispered ancestral names to their children. Elders taught secret histories and rituals. Communities adapted to preserve knowledge and culture in hidden ways. These small acts of defiance, quiet and courageous, laid the foundation for survival that would cross oceans and centuries. On the Congo River, Diogo Cao met the King of Congo in 1483. Initially, relations were cordial. Gifts were exchanged, and nobles even traveled to Portugal to learn European language and customs. The king, baptized as João I, sought diplomacy with these foreign visitors, believing in cautious friendship. But the Portuguese were not interested in equality or partnership. They were patient, calculating, and relentless. They wanted captives, including noble sons, commoners, and warriors. Families were shattered. Chiefs and elders faced impossible decisions: resist and risk destruction, or comply and risk betrayal of their people. Violence escalated along the coasts and rivers, and fear became a constant companion to African communities. The economic and social impact of these early encounters was immediate and profound. Trade networks that had once strengthened African societies were redirected to serve European greed. Kingdoms fractured as rival leaders were incentivized to capture their neighbors for trade. Guns and other foreign technologies gave some rulers temporary power, but they also brought instability and bloodshed. Children, women, and the elderly became targets in ways previously unknown as European demand for captives grew. Yet, even amidst the fear and destruction, knowledge survived. African agricultural techniques, ironworking skills, medicinal practices, and cultural rituals were preserved, often hidden, and passed down to the next generation. The cultural and spiritual assault was as devastating as the physical. Missionaries and explorers often denigrated African religions, mocking sacred rituals and undermining spiritual leaders. Yet Africans resisted spiritually as well, hiding symbols, performing rituals in secret, and keeping their ancestral knowledge alive. These small acts of defiance, quiet and courageous, made the foundation for survival that would cross oceans and centuries. By the late 1400s, the pattern was clear. Portuguese forts and trading posts along the coast were the first points in what would become a centuries-long system of human exploitation. Spain, the Netherlands, and later England followed, drawn by the potential wealth of human lives. Communities that thrived for centuries were destabilized. Families were destroyed. Kings and chiefs struggled to protect their people, often failing in the face of superior European technology and strategy. Yet African resilience persisted. Knowledge, rituals, songs, and stories were preserved, hidden, and whispered through generations. These early events of the 15th century were not simply historical footnotes. They were the foundation for centuries of trauma that would eventually reach the Americas. The anger, grief, and vigilance carried by Black Americans today are echoes of the first stolen Africans, the children separated from mothers, the fathers fighting impossible battles, and the kingdoms disrupted by foreign greed. Even in the darkest times, Africans preserved life, knowledge, and culture. This resilience is at the heart of survival, identity, and cultural continuity. The arrival of the first white men in Africa changed the continent forever. But even as ships carried away human lives, as kingdoms struggled and communities wept, the African spirit refused to vanish. Families resisted. Songs survived, knowledge endured, and the traces of that survival would later shape the culture, identity, and strength of Black Americans centuries later. Every song, every rhythm, every prayer is connected to these moments on the African coast when the first white sails appeared. History tried to erase these lives, but it could not erase memory. It could not erase resilience. The first encounters between Europeans and Africans in the 15th century were brutal, devastating, and transformative. They were also the beginning of a story of resistance, preservation, and enduring strength, a story that continues in every Black life today. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you feel that I've delivered the purpose of this story, you can support the channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing it with others.
Your support helps us bring more untold stories to light. Bye for now, and I'll see you in the next video.